there are so many definitions. If you ask a coach or 5 coaches, you'll probably get 5 different answers, and it's not 100% certain that these coaches have dug in or individuals have read literature on what the core truly is. So what is the definition? We don't really know. We talk about the abs, things that surround the midsection of our body, abs and lower back, but it is truly deeper than that, especially if you go into the literature. I think it's used excessively in many times, in many circumstances, and that we use it a lot of times to fluff training up, to really puff up the training and do a lot more than we really need to. And that sometimes also then affects the quality of the movement, which is really a problem. So let's start with the basics here. The background: anything that is attached to the spine and influences movement, that is core. That is really what core is for me. And if you've been following me on social media for a while, this is what I've been preaching for a while, and I'm excited I actually got to put this in the book. The core is anything attached to the spine. That means that the shoulder blades and the hips are also involved here, the rib cage involved. Anything that also then influences movement. So anything coordinates movement and influences movement, it starts from the core, guys. Now, we're also talking about the kinetic chain. Kinetic chain is important because it powers, or the core powers the kinetic chain. And what we're doing in one side of the body typically is not the same on the other side. So it really affects on what happens on the other side of the body. We're looking at freestyle backstroke. When we are moving with one arm, it's never mirrored what we're doing on the other sides. The other part of the body is always doing something different. And what I've noticed with my swimmers and me testing them, especially on a split squat isometric hold and elbow side bridge, looking at it typically in a group of swimmers, or my swimmers in general, about 20% of them have quite significant differences between their right and left extremities. And that typically comes then down to something going on in the kinetic link and the core. And throughout the season, throughout a career, and also as we are selecting exercises, the best way of looking at how we want to progress is that we want to start with stability. We're moving into strength, and then we're moving into power. Now, between strength and power, we have strength endurance, and after power, we're finishing with power endurance, because swimming is cyclical, and we're going all the way up to 15 to 20 minutes of work if we are miles, and if we open water, even longer than that. So there's a lot of endurance that we're talking about here. In the shorter events, the more power, and the longer events, the more strength endurance. So, and it's, like I said here, it's always typically a hybrid. When we're talking about power, it has to be quick movements. Velocity needs to be there. But strength and strength endurance, there doesn't have to be movement. We can do that statically as well. So holding positions and getting much stronger in a static position, that also has been shown to transfer into dynamic muscle actions. Same thing goes for the core as well. And when we are looking at the core, we typically split it up easily in anti-extension, anti-rotation, or anti-flexion movements. And if we just quickly go over them, anti-extension, we don't want to extend our spine back. So we're talking about hips, hip flexors, and abs, typically anything on the front of the body. So when we're going out with ab wheel rollouts, curl ups, or a straight arm bridge, anything that is in the prone position when we are bridging. We're looking at anti-rotational movements. We want to avoid rotating or develop our rotational capabilities. Anything that is Pallof press. I love Pallof press variations, especially more overhead work. Suitcase carries, and it doesn't have to be just a carry, it can be an offset carry, carrying another kettlebell. And bird dog variations, anything in those natures is going to help with anti-rotational movements. If we're looking at then anti-flexion movements, we don't want to flex the spine down, which is essentially hunching down. So we need to develop then the posterior chain. Looking at back extension, glute bridges, supine bridges, anything in those natures. So that's a simple way of looking at the core, but also that we test. And I mean, the way you can also look at how we want to, I'm going to get into a little bit later. Testing, I'm talking about it slightly in the book, subjective testing, more so balance, seeing how well someone can balance on one foot is what I like to do more for a subjective test, more an eye test to see how well we can do it. And we're talking about the tripod of the foot. So we have 3 points of the foot, one behind the heel, then under the big toe, and then the little toe. And typically in swimming, we tend to lift off the big toe. That's one of my big flaws. And thank you, Dr. Nick, for helping me point that out, knowing that has been a weakness of mine and potentially what has caused my back pain from a teenage year. And that stems all the way in going up to the hamstring and glute medius as well. And it's also coming from just dysfunction in movement. So I do know that I'm not perfect in the way I move, but like I said, I strive for perfection. I am aware of what I'm not able to do and what I need to improve. So again, that comes from mindfulness, guys, just knowing yourself and teaching and making your swimmers more aware of the balance, starting with the foot. If we don't have the static balance, the dynamic balance of jumping around is also going to be really challenging. So yes, when we're doing a lot of jumps, we need to make sure that we have the contacts in place. Now, when we're looking more objective testing, we're talking more strength endurance testing. I like to do 5 tests. Well, 4 main movements: the McGill sit-up, elbow bridge test, and that's on the one side and the other side, and that's on the side. Straight arm bridge test, that is just prone, and a back extension in a GHD, or anyone really holding on to the legs with the hips really being at the edge of a table and holding each of these for as long as possible. And how does this then become objective? I'm going deeper into this in the book, but the way I have found this being really effective to track and also to look at the core and get a good blueprint of the core, if you will, to get the front, the back, and the side and how we're doing. And also can be a really good indicator of injuries. We can actually get good information on how we're doing, especially on the side bridge. And what we did go over here was 8-week changes in 4 of my swimmers in the webinar earlier this week. It was really cool to see that one of my swimmers that I worked with, she was 13 years at the time. Oh, by the way, yes, the way I do my objective testing is that we're holding it for max time. Depending on how long you hold, say you're holding 60 seconds or 120 seconds, 1 minute or 2 minutes. For every 10 seconds that you hold, you earn 1 point. We're maxing the points at 20. That's 3 minutes and 20 seconds. Now, that's where we have the foundation. Having this young swimmer coming in, 12, 13 years old, she tested a 3 on her left elbow and then a 15 on her right elbow. We'll talk about a asymmetry here. 8 weeks after, they were both the same. Not that we were not developing the other side, it just wasn't developing enough, and we really were focusing in on the first 2 months to really balance the entire body. And after 8 weeks, they were both the same. So we had a 400% increase in the left and no change on the right, which is okay because we still saw faster swimming at the end of the year. Similarly with another swimmer who just showed great imbalance, having a much stronger posterior chain, which we don't see that often, scoring a 16, almost 3 minutes. So we are well above what I would like a 14-year-old to be at. And then testing 7 and 6 on everything else. And we don't necessarily like that one part, our back, our glutes, our hamstrings being overdeveloped. So our hip flexors and our abs completely underdeveloped. So we do need to balance that out as well. And we saw the entire body catch up and we're in between the 7 and 10 ranges, but the back extension dropped down 50%, but we still ended up swimming 2 seconds faster at the end of the year because the body became a lot more balanced instead of really relying on its strength. So just by doing smart core training, we see changes pretty quick, especially if you get a good baseline of testing them. And if you then see a big red flag in either pain in one side versus the other, because if your swimmers are feeling any kind of pain when you're testing any of these core tests that I mentioned, you are terminating them. You're not continuing a test if it's painful. That just means that we have to take a few steps back before we are continuing. So that is part of the solution, how we act